And a new Florida law lets the state officially label organizations domestic terrorist groups. Just weeks ago, right here in Tampa, Governor Ron DeSantis announced the first names that he wanted the FDLE to place on that list. Right now, that designation still has not taken effect, and the whole thing is in front of a federal judge. Take a look. The law is House Bill 1471. It allows the head of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement to recommend that a group be designated a terrorist organization. That is, if the group is based in Florida and the state says it poses a threat. On July the 1st, the day the law took effect, the governor announced his recommendations for the list. He named the Council on American Islamic Relations, best known as CAIR, the Muslim Brotherhood, Antifa, and more than 90 other groups, including several drug cartels, as terrorist groups. The very next day, CAIR sued, joined by the Florida chapter of the ACLU and the Southern Poverty Law Center. Then, this week, a twist. In a court filing Monday, the state's own attorneys told the court they can't yet say when the rules for making the terror group designation legal will be finished. Both sides are due back in court before the judge on July the 22nd. This is round 2 in court. The governor tried this by executive order back in December. A federal judge blocked it in March. The state points to a 2007 terror financing case where CAIR was named an unindicted co-conspirator, though the group itself was never charged. CAIR calls that designation political and says the label itself puts its members in danger. Its Florida director says she reported 2 violent threats to the Tampa Police Department in a span of 3 days. And Mitch, you've been covering this story extensively. Tell us about the latest information on this.
Right. So the governor was in Tampa on July 1st, the very first day this law went into effect, and basically said, we're making the recommendation, we got it from Mark Glass, the FDLE head. He's given us a recommendation of all these groups, as you mentioned, and now we have to go to the cabinet. That's part of the law, is that the cabinet needs to approve or reject that. Mm-hmm. And I actually called last week the FDLE and said, where are we at in that process? Because the governor had said there is no immediate meeting. We have to have an emergency meeting. They still haven't had that meeting. And I guess what we've learned in the litigation is that I don't know how much official processing needs to take place, but it's just not set up yet. So in terms of CAIR fighting this designation, they can't even do that right now because the state actually has to go through the correct process. I think the governor just kind of maybe went a little too quick on this. He was so eager to do this. As you mentioned in the piece, this is the second time he's tried to do this. Executive order back in December, the federal judge in March struck down. All these groups are mentioned, but we're talking about CAIR, the Council of American Islamic Relations. And as you mentioned in the piece, this goes back to 2007. That's really the damning part of where you can, I guess, credibly or that CAIR would disagree with that.
And that Holy Land Foundation case.
Which, by the way, 245 groups in all were named as unindicted co-conspirators. It wasn't just CAIR. I did do a lot of looking into this. There were some members of CAIR that were known, had some association there. So it's a kind of a judgment call really to look at that, but it goes back a long way. So the fact that this, I think the interesting thing is, why is this happening now? Texas did something similar. I believe Indiana did as well. I think it really comes after the 2003 Hamas attack on Israel, where we're having, and then the protests in college campuses, where we're kind of getting the same kind of energy and kind of, intensity on this issue that we had after 9/11 in America.
But critics are asking, how can several groups be designated as terrorist organizations, and there are no specific rules to explain what that criteria is?
Well, I think that's the big question that the state has to answer. And look, I'm no big fan of any terrorist organization. Mitch, you might remember back in the day, I wrote a column for the Tampa Tribune, actually 2, defending CAIR and their actions as an unindicted co-conspirator, which basically just allowed the federal government the opportunity to look into some of their activities. Subsequently, I have seen their former state head here in Florida. He did look the other way and refused to say anything bad about what happened in Israel that you referenced on October 6th, October 7th rather. And to me, that showed me personally made a greater impact of what he didn't say and looking the other way than all the good things that his organization claimed to have done prior to that when he was heading it here in Florida. It's also probably worth noting that CAIR as a kind of an umbrella group is different from CAIR Florida. in terms of what was being done by the federal government in their investigation of CARE as an unindicted co-conspirator. To my knowledge, it was not the Florida group
They're based in
specifically. But
national headquarters based in Washington, D.C. They have chapters all over the country. One of the things that CARE has received the most attention, but the fact is that there were more than 90 organizations that the governor recommended be placed on this list. They included Antifa, the Muslim Brotherhood, the Cartel de Sinaloa, Tren de Aragua, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of Iran, Cartel of Noreste. There's quite a few. What happens to these organizations who are recommended for a terrorist list and are yet never officially placed
it's
on
kind
it?
of, it's kind of ill-conceived in the sense that it's almost like guilty until proven innocent. And certainly, I'm not a big fan of most of these organizations. I think if you're sympathetic toward terrorist groups and you're associated with terrorist groups, you probably ought to be treated like a terrorist group. However, this is still the United States of America. We have a constitution, and they have their rights to due process and to be considered innocent until proven guilty.
And the thing is that except for CARE, these groups, Muslim Brotherhood has no chapters in Florida. I mean, we've looked, okay, Antifa, some people even question whether that's a group versus protesters who wear black and do demonstrations. And yes, I talked to a conservative lawmaker, former lawmaker, back when this bill was passed, and he had objections to it. He said, as a constitutionalist, he was concerned that, okay, what happens if David Jolly's the governor next year, and he decides there's a couple groups that he doesn't like, and the cabinet, goes away. Right, declares that. I mean, it is really, questionable. The law itself is very controversial because, again, what's the criteria? I mean, they do list the criteria there, but I think that it's going to be interesting how this all plays out.
One thing that I wanted to add is that, similar to what you were stating, is this is a larger organization, right? And as I researched this, I saw that it is the largest human rights organization designated for Muslims, right? And so
it's a civil rights organization.
It's a civil rights organization
advocating for the Muslim community in the United States.
Correct.
Yes.
And a lot of times, these individuals, this is a resource for them. And so when I saw that, I just think that it is a bit suspect that we're not looking at how do we categorize unequivocally what an organization, a terror organization is, and to pool organizations that's doing civil rights and human rights with a cartel. And I'm from Central America. I know what a cartel looks like. That isn't like a cartel. And this is another thing that I wanted to add. It's a very slippery slope, right? Because they've been in a community for so long. They've even received grants from the Florida bar. So are you saying that the Florida bar is complicit with a potential terrorist organization? Not so. It's a very slippery slope. It's infringing on the First Amendment, and especially since you really can't back up and say this is what a designation looks like, it almost kind of seems suspect, and it almost seems as though they're being attacked and kind of even being segregated in a way, because they shouldn't be pooled with someone like a cartel.